The battlefield stretched endlessly beneath a sky choked with ash. Captain Aiden Cole moved through the ruins, his boots crunching over shattered armor and broken bodies. The air reeked of scorched metal and something worse, the acrid scent of Zarzith bioforms decomposing into a sickly, fungal residue. This was victory, or so they claimed. Aiden's visor flickered with incoming data, scanning for movement. Nothing but the dead. His grip tightened around his rifle, though he knew it wouldn't help against the thoughts creeping in. The ones whispering that the war had become something beyond reason, beyond honor. He'd fought countless battles, seen entire colonies reduced to slag, but today, something felt different. Clear, Sergeant Riker's voice crackled through the comms. No survivors. Not that they ever leave any. Aiden exhaled slowly. That was the problem. The Zarzith never surrendered, never faltered. Their hive mind adapted, evolving with each encounter, absorbing every tactic humanity threw at them. The war wasn't a war. It was a slow, methodical extinction, and the tide wasn't turning in humanity's favor. Lieutenant Mara Voss approached, her armor slick with alien ichor. Command says to hold position. Another wave is inbound. Aiden glanced at the horizon. A burnt, skeletal city stretched into the distance. Nothing left but crumbling towers and rusted spires. How many times had they fought for worlds like this, only to abandon them once the cost outweighed the gain? He turned to Mara, noting the exhaustion in her eyes. How many did we lose? She hesitated. Too many. Aiden didn't press. He knew the numbers were never good. The Zarzith were relentless, but that wasn't what kept him awake at night. It was the choices they were being forced to make. He tapped his command. We need reinforcements if we're expected to hold. Static, then a reply. Negative, Captain. You are to engage and assess the viability of Project Revenant. Aiden's stomach twisted. The words were cold, clinical. He'd heard whispers of the program, but the details were buried beneath layers of classified reports and moral ambiguity. Understood, he said, though he didn't understand at all. A hum filled the air, a deep, resonating vibration that sent a chill through his spine. The horizon darkened. Movement. The next wave was coming. Positions, he barked, his squad snapping to readiness. They braced, weapons raised, eyes scanning the shifting shadows ahead. And then they came. The Zarzith surged forward, a tide of chitin and steel. Their forms twisted as they moved, limbs reshaping, claws elongating, armor plates shifting to adapt mid-charge. Gunfire erupted around Aiden, the deafening roar of humanity's desperation. Aiden fired, his rifle punching holes into the oncoming horde, but the Zarzith didn't slow. They never did. Soldiers fell beside him, their screams lost beneath the cacophony of war. A shriek tore through the air, a new variant, faster, stronger. It leaped toward him, serrated limbs slicing through the smoke. Aiden twisted, firing point-blank into its chest. The creature staggered but didn't fall. Its wound closed in seconds. Then it lunged again. Pain exploded through Aiden's side as claws raked across his armor, breaching the plating. He hit the ground hard, vision swimming. The Zarzith loomed over him, mandibles clicking. It should have finished him, but it hesitated. A mistake. Mara's blade punched through its skull from behind. The alien convulsed, then collapsed, its body already dissolving into decay. She grabbed Aiden's arm, hauling him up. You good? He pressed a hand to his wound. I'll live. For now. The battlefield was chaos, a maelstrom of blood and fire. But something else was happening. The Zarzith were adapting faster. Too fast. Aiden watched as one of the creatures tore through an entire squad, its body shifting mid-strike to counter every defense they had. This wasn't just evolution. This was calculation. Then his comm crackled again. Revenants deploying in 60 seconds. Aiden's pulse quickened. No turning back now. Above, the sky split open. Streaks of fire rained down as drop pods hurtled toward the battlefield. They hit with bone-rattling force, the impact sending shockwaves through the ground. The doors hissed open, and the monsters stepped out. Not Zarzith. Humans. Or what used to be. They moved too fast. Their armor was wrong. organic, shifting, fusing with their bodies. Their eyes glowed with something unnatural. And when they attacked, it wasn't with weapons. It was with claws, with inhuman strength, with an efficiency that mirrored the Zarzith too closely. The enemy barely had time to react before they were torn apart. Limbs severed, bodies crushed, entire squads erased in seconds. The battlefield fell silent, the remaining Zarzith retreating, something they had never done before. And the Revenants? They stood among the carnage, breathing heavily, hands slick with alien blood. Aiden felt the weight of it settle over him. They had won, but at what cost? Mara whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. What have we done? Aiden had no answer. He watched as one of the Revenants turned, its gaze locking onto him. Something flickered in its expression. Recognition? Or hunger? The war wasn't over, but something far worse had just begun. The silence after battle was always the same, thick, unnatural, the kind that settled in the bones and refused to leave. Captain Aiden Cole stood among the wreckage, watching as the Revenants surveyed their work. If work was even the right word for it. There was no hesitation, no regret. Just the cold, mechanical efficiency of something beyond human. The Zarzith were gone. What remained of them was unrecognizable, shredded beyond anything resembling an enemy force. The ground was slick with their remains, alien ichor pooling in the cracks of the ruined city. Humanity had never won this decisively before. Aiden should have felt relief. Instead, he felt sick. Sergeant Riker stepped up beside him, wiping a hand across his blood-smeared face. His expression was unreadable. They ran. He almost sounded amused. First time I've ever seen them break. Aiden forced himself to nod. They weren't prepared for us. For them, Riker corrected, jerking his chin toward the Revenants. You saw what they did. You saw how they moved? Aiden had seen. He wished he hadn't. Across the field, a Revenant stood over a still-twitching Zarzith, its elongated fingers curled into claws. Its armor pulsed as if breathing, the blackened plating shifting subtly with each movement. Without ceremony, it plunged its hand into the creature's chest, ripping free something that squirmed and pulsed, a biocore, the thing that allowed the Zarzith to evolve. The Revenant held it for a moment before its fingers clenched. The core collapsed, disintegrating into dust. Aiden turned away. Mara Voss approached, her expression tight. Command wants us to push forward, she said. They think we can end this war within the year. Within the year. Aiden glanced at the Revenants again. His grip tightened on his rifle. They're really going to keep using them? They're winning us battles, Mara said. He knew that tone. The one she used when she was trying to convince herself as much as him. Riker let out a short, humorless laugh. They're not just winning battles. They're wiping out entire fronts. Every time we send them in, the Zarzith don't just lose. They get erased. He turned to Aiden, eyes sharp. And maybe that's the only way to survive. Aiden didn't reply. Survival. The word felt hollow. Days passed. More battles. More victories. Each one felt less like a triumph and more like an inevitability. The Revenants were no longer an experiment. They were the front line, the blunt instrument of war that humanity had been waiting for. Wherever they were deployed, the Zarzith fell in droves, unable to adapt fast enough to counter them. Aiden watched as his squad changed. Not physically, not like the Revenants, but something in their eyes and the way they spoke. They no longer questioned the brutality, no longer hesitated before delivering the final blow. One evening, after another skirmish had been reduced to nothing but echoes of slaughter, Aiden found himself staring at his reflection in the glass of a command terminal. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. He looked like a man losing something vital. A door hissed open behind him. You're thinking about it, aren't you? Mara. Aiden didn't turn. Thinking about what? She stepped closer, crossing her arms. The augmentations. Project Revenant. Aiden exhaled, fogging the glass. I've read the reports, she continued. It's not just physical enhancements. It rewires your mind, sharpens instincts, lowers hesitation, a pause, dulls empathy. Aiden finally turned to face her. And that doesn't terrify you? Mara held his gaze for a long moment. Then, softly, "It does." Aiden pressed his palms against the console. "I fought this war because I thought we were different, that we had something worth fighting for. But every day, we're losing pieces of ourselves." He looked up. "At what point do we stop being human?" Mara hesitated. Then she said, "Command has given us a new mission." Something about her voice sent ice through Aiden's veins. "What is it?" She swallowed. "There's a human colony, Vetra 5. They've stopped cooperating, refusing to send resources. Command believes they might be preparing to defect." Aiden's pulse pounded. "They're civilians. They're a liability." Riker's voice cut in from the doorway. He leaned against the frame, arms crossed. "And liabilities need to be handled." Aiden stared at him. "You can't be serious." Riker tilted his head. "You think the Zarzith care about civilians? They wouldn't hesitate. Why should we?" Aiden felt the weight of every choice pressing down on him. He had seen what the Revenants could do. He had watched them tear through enemy lines with no remorse. And now they were being sent against their own. This wasn't war. This was something worse. He pushed off the console, turning fully to Riker. "I won't be part of this." Riker's expression didn't change. "You don't have a choice." Aiden took a step forward. "That's so." Riker's gaze was cold. "I like you, Cole. Always have. But if you stand in the way of this mission, you won't just be defying orders." A pause. "You'll be an enemy." Aiden's fingers twitched toward his weapon. Riker saw it, smirked, then turned and walked away. Mara exhaled sharply. "This is getting out of control." "It's already out of control," Aiden murmured. She hesitated. Then, voice low, "What do we do?" Aiden looked at her. Really looked at her. There was fear in her eyes. Fear of what they were becoming. He made his decision. "We leave," he said. "We get out. Before it's too late." Mara stiffened. "You're talking about desertion?" "I'm talking about survival," Aiden corrected. "Not just for us. For whatever's left of humanity that isn't willing to cross this line." Mara looked down. He could see the war waging inside her. Then finally she nodded. Aiden exhaled. They weren't just fighting the Zarzith anymore. They were fighting what humanity had become. The stolen dropship hummed as it cut through the void, its engines burning silent against the vast emptiness of space. Aiden Cole sat in the cockpit, his hands steady on the controls, but his mind anything but. He had fought in wars before, had watched men and women bleed, had buried friends, had made choices that gnawed at him long after the battle was won. But this wasn't war. This was something else. Mara Voss stood behind him, her arms crossed, eyes locked on the view screen as the colony of Vetra 5 came into view. A world untouched by the conflict. A world that had chosen to remain on the fringes, neither aiding the war effort nor standing against it. And for that, Command had marked them as a threat. Aiden clenched his jaw. Riker and the Revenants would be arriving soon. They would not negotiate. They would not hesitate. He turned to Mara. "We need to warn them." She nodded, already moving. The descent was rough. The dropship wasn't built for delicate maneuvers, and Aiden didn't have time for a smooth landing. The moment they hit the ground, dust and sand kicking up around them, he was already out of his seat, rifle slung over his shoulder. The colony wasn't large. A few dozen buildings supplied depots, agricultural domes. Simple, unremarkable, but the people who lived here? They weren't soldiers. Mara approached a group of civilians who had gathered, their faces etched with confusion and caution. "We don't have much time," she said, her voice urgent. "You're in danger. You need to evacuate." An older man stepped forward. His face was lined with years of labor, of hard choices. "Who are you?" Aiden didn't waste time. "Former UEC forces. The military is coming. They won't leave survivors." The man studied them both, his gaze sharp. "And why should we trust you?" Aiden let out a breath. "Because we didn't have to come here. But we did." A moment of silence stretched between them. Then the man nodded. Chaos followed. Alarms blared as the colony scrambled to gather supplies. Parents grabbed their children. Workers abandoned their posts, fear tightening its grip around them. They had lived on the edge of war for so long, believing themselves safe. Now, safety was an illusion they could no longer afford. Then the sky burned. Aiden looked up, his stomach twisting. Streaks of light tore through the atmosphere. Drop pods. Dozens of them. They were out of time. The first pod hit, the shockwave sending a tremor through the ground. Then another. And another. The revenants had arrived. Mara grabbed Aiden's arm. "We can't stop them. We can try." The first revenant stepped from its pod, its armor shifting like liquid metal, its movements too smooth, too precise. The others followed. They did not speak, did not issue commands. They only advanced. Aiden raised his rifle. Fired. The shot struck the nearest revenant in the chest, but the armor absorbed the impact, rippling like disturbed water. The creature tilted its head. Then it moved. Aiden barely had time to react before it was on him. He dodged, barely, feeling the heat of its presence as it slashed past him. He turned, firing again, this time aiming for the exposed flesh beneath its jaw. The shot connected. The revenant staggered. Mara was beside him, her blade flashing. She drove it into the joint of another revenant's shoulder, severing its arm at the connection point. It didn't scream. It didn't bleed. It simply reformed. The colony was in chaos. Civilians ran, some scrambling toward evacuation shuttles, others frozen in terror. The revenants didn't care. They cut through anything in their path, an unstoppable tide. Aiden saw Riker through the smoke. He wasn't wearing his usual armor. He had become one of them. The transformation was subtle, his features sharper, his stance eerily calm. His eyes, once familiar, now burned with something inhuman. "Aiden," Riker said, his voice smooth, measured. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Aiden tightened his grip on his weapon. "This isn't a war anymore, Riker." Riker exhaled, almost amused. "It's survival. Then why are we killing our own?" "They chose wrong." Aiden shook his head. "No, we did." Riker tilted his head. "You don't understand." "Not yet. But you will." He took a step forward. Aiden raised his rifle, but Riker was faster. His hand shot out, gripping the barrel and twisting. The weapon snapped like dry wood. Aiden stumbled back. Riker didn't press the attack. "This isn't the end for you," Riker said. "You're better than that. You'll see." A scream cut through the air. Aiden turned. One of the revenants had reached the evacuation point. It moved through the civilians like a shadow, precise, efficient. No hesitation. Mara was already running, cutting through the chaos, trying to get to them before it was too late. Aiden followed, his mind racing. They couldn't win this fight, but they could save some of them. The colony's last transport was lifting off, its engines roaring against the carnage. Mara was at the loading bay, waving people inside, shouting orders. Aiden covered the retreat, firing at anything that got too close, knowing it was only a delay. Then, as the last of the civilians boarded, Mara turned to him. "Go," she yelled. Aiden hesitated. Riker was watching. He did not chase, did not command his forces to stop them. He only watched. Aiden stepped onto the ship. The doors sealed. The colony vanished beneath them as the transport surged skyward. He sat heavily against the bulkhead, chest rising and falling with exhaustion, with something deeper. Mara slid down beside him. They had saved some, but not enough. Aiden looked at his hands. They were shaking. "What now?" Mara asked. Aiden didn't answer right away. He thought about the war, about the things they had done in the name of victory, about the monsters they had become. And for the first time, he didn't know if humanity was worth saving anymore.